Welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's only daily television platform for small businesses. Over the past 7 years, we've understood what matters most to you, the entrepreneur. And in year 8, we're taking head-on 2 of your most pressing concerns, that of funding and mentoring. I'm Sunanda Jayaseelan, tonight bringing you part 1 of a 2-part exclusive sit-down conversation that we did with the Chairperson and MD of Biocon, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw. The Leaders of Tomorrow team travelled to Bengaluru to sit down with one of India's best-known entrepreneurs to understand from her what her own entrepreneurial journey was like, what helped her to stand instead when the journey was long, the journey was difficult, and therefore her advice for businesses watching this interview, what she had to say about the one quality she feels is essential for entrepreneurs, no matter what industry you're in, and also what it means to fundraise in the current situation given the NBFC as well as the NPA crisis, and what businesses should do when it comes to the long run and their growth strategy. Listen up. One of India's best-known entrepreneurs, making every possible most influential list across the world, getting every possible award, whether it's in the public arena or the private space here in the country, a compassionate catalyst, as you describe yourself, rather than a philanthropist. Ma'am, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on this interview today on the Leaders of Tomorrow. It's an absolute pleasure to be chatting with you. My first question to you is, of all the adjectives perhaps that's been used to describe you as an entrepreneur, what term would you pick and why?
First and foremost, thanks a lot for having me on this show. I just believe that if I had to use one word to describe myself, I think I want to see myself as someone who's very different, someone who's, someone who sort of thinks out of the box, and someone who basically treads on an untrodden path.
Okay, all of which you've done in your very long career. If you were to pick 2 or 3 qualities that you think are essential for our entrepreneurs, for anyone who's watching this interview, whether it's learned or whether it's something that they possess innately, what would you say is essential?
So if I look at my own journey, and when I look at some of the success factors of my journey, I do believe that entrepreneurs who actually pick on new and different ideas Sure. To build on, I think have a good edge over others. Sure. I think, challenging the status quo, constantly seeing how you can differentiate from the others, how you can pull out of the pack. Those are some of the strategies I have used to build the kind of DNA of Biocon, if you were to call it that.
Okay. While the story of Biocon, of course, is something that is very well known, I do want to step back and talk about your initial days. And you have the story of a quintessential entrepreneur in the sense that you started in your garage, you started with 10,000 rupees, you tried to raise funds initially, found it very challenging, both because of your age, your gender, etc. Your father, in fact, I understand, was asked to be a co-guarantor to the loans that you were trying to raise. But looking back on those days, 2 or 3 things that you think that perhaps have helped you in your long career.
So first and foremost, I think, endurance is something that also describes my character, because I never give up. I think, if you believe in what you're doing, if you're passionate about that idea that you're trying to build and take to the market, I think those are some of the essential catalysts of endurance.
Okay.
Because I think to endure, you must believe in what you're doing. And I believe that, you somehow find a way of surviving. So it's that survival instinct that is extremely important for any entrepreneur. And, it's that combination of survival and endurance to make sure that you do take that idea to the next level and to the market eventually is something that really bodes well for most entrepreneurs.
When you started out, did you perhaps foresee that this is where you were going to be in, say, 10, 15, 20 years?
Most entrepreneurs, I would say, no entrepreneur really knows where they're heading or where they will be in 10 to 20 years.
Sure.
Yes, you might have an aspiration, you might have a dream. And many of the young entrepreneurs of today want to become billionaires and want to become unicorns. Yeah. That's a fact. But you know, there are no guarantees. So even if you aspire to be a billionaire, even if you aspire to be a unicorn, there are no guarantees. Your business might fail in its first year. You might give up very soon, and so on and so forth. So it's not an easy path. And I believe that when I started my company, I had no idea where I would take it.
Okay.
As I said, I was only interested in building my company brick by brick. Sure. And that's what I did for almost 20 years. I steadily built the company. I created technologies, I created capabilities, and I created markets. But it took me 20 years from which I could then use it as a springboard to much greater and higher speed of success.
Okay. Which brings me to my next question. In a time and in an environment where things are changing perhaps every day for an entrepreneur, how much of a long-term vision do you need to have? Because you really don't know what's changing around you, and how much should you be aware of what is happening around you?
So if you asked me this question when I started Biocon, I would say I had absolutely no long-term vision. I had a very short-term vision. And I think every startup entrepreneur needs that short-term vision, because you have to, make sure that you keep surviving from year to year. Once you sort of reach a certain level of critical mass and growth of your company, then you can afford to have a long-term aspiration, a mid-term aspiration, and a short-term, strategy.
Sure.
And I believe that having that long-term vision is good after you get to a certain point. So obviously now I do have a long-term vision, and I have a strategy to get there.
Sure. We were talking about fundraising when it came to your early days at Biocon. I want to break that up into 2 or 3 questions. The first question is, what do you think should be the approach of a small business when it comes to fundraising? Because we get, different opinions when you speak to experts like yourself. Some say don't raise funds till you actually need it. Some say it's the fuel in your engine. Have it in your engine before you really need it. On what side of that perhaps argument or opinion are you?
No, I personally believe you must be adequately funded, because without adequate funding, survival itself becomes quite a challenge. If I were to compare the instruments of financing available to me in 1978 compared to what young entrepreneurs can avail of today, it was very different. Today you can get angel investors, you can get venture funding, you can get debt financing, and many, many other instruments of funding. In my days, there was no venture funding, no angel investors. I had to only rely on debt financing. And so I had to go from bank to bank trying to raise funds for my company. But having said that, I would always advise a young entrepreneur to be adequately funded. Because I think it's important to be adequately funded, because it is a very important part of survival. You don't want to, be taking an idea to the market and find that you've run out of funds.
Okay.
So I think it's very important to be adequately funded, and you should know what it will take you to go from an idea to a proof of concept. And, how do you take that proof of concept through that journey to the market. Sure. So I think at each stage you will need funding, and you must know what that financial need is going to be.
All right, I'm going to slip in a very short break on that note, but we will continue bringing you highlights from that very exclusive and fascinating conversation with one of India's best-known entrepreneurs, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw. That's coming up on the other side. Just stay tuned.
Even though there's lots of money chasing good ideas, you need that good idea. If you don't have a good or great idea, you're going to find it very difficult to access that capital.
Sure.
So it's about money. Yes, there is a lot of money available, but they are only looking for good ideas, and good ideas are not so easy to find. So I think every entrepreneur today has to challenge themselves with that one good, differentiated idea or one great idea which is disruptive.
Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. Tonight on The Crux, bringing you part 1 of an exclusive conversation with the Chairperson and MD of Biocon. You're talking of the plethora of funding options for small businesses today, for entrepreneurs today. Do you think that's also perhaps a challenge in the sense that there's so much money chasing small businesses that we're looking at valuations and what's really happening on valuations, and perhaps in some sense that it's not a true reflection of what you're building as a company?
No, I mean, I would look at it in a very different way. I mean, let's face it, even though there's lots of money chasing good ideas, you need that good idea. If you don't have a good or great idea, you're going to find it very difficult to access that capital.
Sure.
So it's about money. Yes, there is a lot of money available, but they are only looking for good ideas, and good ideas are not so easy to find. So I think every entrepreneur today has to challenge themselves with that one good, differentiated idea or one great idea which is disruptive.
Sure.
So I think that's when you will find that yes, you have a lot of capital chasing you. Yes, I think most young entrepreneurs of today are very concerned and caught up about valuation. Yeah. As a first-time entrepreneur, as a startup entrepreneur, I don't think you can, be too choosy about that. But once you start building your company, I think it is important to understand what the value of your company is as you build it. Initially, it doesn't matter because it's just notional.
Sure.
It's only when you start building it and taking it from concept to proof of concept, then you want to know whether that proof of concept has a value. And then from proof of concept to the next level and to the next level and finally to the market, it's very important to know the kind of value you're creating. And that's a lesson I learned. Okay. Because, when I was building Biocon, I actually had no knowledge of the value I was creating. It was only when I started getting venture funding in at a later stage that I realized that, okay, this is the kind of valuation that, is being talked about. Sure. And then finally, when I went to the market, I realized the kind of value we had created. But I had no idea and I wasn't tracking value creation along the path.
Okay, and when you did go to the market, you had a phenomenal response, oversubscribed 30, 40 times as far as the IPO is concerned. A flip sort of, if I can, play the devil's advocate and talk about valuations. You were talking about ideas and having a strong idea for entrepreneurs. A lot of entrepreneurs say, what happens to those businesses that are perhaps not flavor of the month? What happens then?
Well, I am a good example of that. Okay. I mean, you cannot be the flavor of the month, but if you are going to be, the next gen flavor, well, that's a very exciting thought. And very often ideas are ahead of their times. And I think you shouldn't shy away from that idea. I did that when I started my own company. I think biotech was on nobody's radar.
Yeah.
I think enzyme technologies were just not even understood. And I decided to go for it because I just got so captured by that idea that you could replace chemical technologies with enzyme technologies, and that you could replace polluting technologies with green technologies. It was an idea ahead of its time. Those were not the times of climate change and environmental sustainability. But I found it very exciting. And I thought, wow, this is something worth pursuing. And that's why I went for it. And of course, I found it a big struggle in the early days because no one was willing to invest in green technologies because in their minds, it was more expensive. And of course, nobody used to factor in effluent treatment as a cost. They would just sort of let their effluents out into the environment and destroy the environment. So at that time, they didn't think that there was a price involved or attached to environmental pollution. Today it is, and today without, every chemical process is being looked at as an enzymatic process so that you can prevent that kind of environmental pollution. But I didn't give up because I felt it was an idea which had to arrive. And it arrived maybe a decade later, but it did arrive. And then I was the first one to do that. So I think it's a very exciting thought of pioneering a new idea, coming up with a new idea which, as you say, may not be the flavor of the month. But if it's a great new idea, its time will come.
It's an interesting time, if I can call it that, for entrepreneurs when it comes to fundraising, because on one hand you have massive amount of money chasing ideas and good ideas, and on the other hand we're seeing what's happening with the NPA crisis in India, 10-year highs, NBFCs, etc. So how do you think that's really going to play out as a corporate leader who's been so closely associated with the big picture here in India? What's your opinion on how that's going to play out?
It's a tough question to answer because there are so many complexities in that, right? I mean, entrepreneurship is a very different kind of, sector of our economy, because entrepreneurship is about backing ideas. It's about access to capital, and that capital must be made available to back these new ideas.
Absolutely.
So that's a very different aspect of our economy. And for one, I really believe in the startup economy. I really believe that's our future. I really want young people to pursue entrepreneurial opportunities because I've always believed that it is far greater for an economy to create jobs than seek jobs. So I think when we are looking at the job challenge that we have today, it is entrepreneurs who will create those jobs. It's not big companies that will offer jobs to aspiring job seekers. So I really believe a lot in entrepreneurship, and I always say that an entrepreneur creates 10 jobs instead of that one job that the entrepreneur might seek as a job seeker.
Okay.
So I feel that the NBFC things that we are talking about today, yes, it is about a liquidity crunch. It is about access to capital, but I don't think it is affecting the startup economy. It is affecting other kinds of economic activity. Let me put it that way. And yes, NBFCs itself are a good entrepreneurial opportunity for many small banking entities. But I think it's more to do with governance. It's more to do with how do you put those guardrails and guidelines around these NBFCs so that we don't get into these kind of situations in the future.
That wraps up part 1 of this special conversation with Kiran Mazumdar Shaw. On part 2 of this exclusive conversation, I get her views as far as women and their representation is concerned on boards, what small businesses should do when it comes to having more women on their boards, as well as why philanthropy is something that's so close to her heart and what it means in today's scenario to be giving back to society. All that much more on part 2. For part 1, that's all we could manage to pack in. If you have any feedback, our contact details is up on your screens in just a moment. Do let us know. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
I think in the tech sector, I think we are finding that almost 30% of companies have women as in the founding team, let's put it that way. Sure. So I would like to look at it in a more positive light. But yes, I think there still seems to be a lot of bias in the financial system when they come to financing male-led startups versus female-led startups. I think somehow women are perceived, and wrongly, as not being risk takers or being as ambitious as men, and I think that's unfair.